You know that feeling when you skip a shower for a couple of days and start to feel gross? Queen Isabella of Castile went 8 months without bathing, on purpose, and she considered it a royal virtue. And believe it or not, she wasn't even the dirtiest one. We like to imagine medieval royalty as flawless, pristine gowns, golden crowns, ceremonies shimmering with perfume and grace. But those portraits lied. Because in reality, the average peasant who washed once a week in a cold river was cleaner than most queens. The maid scrubbing the palace floors often had better hygiene than the princess seated on the throne. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what was happening beneath those embroidered gowns, what crawled in their hair, what rotted behind their smiles, and why royal beauty routines involve things so revolting they make modern horror look tame. By the end, you'll understand why royal treatment in the Middle Ages meant your face could literally fall off. And it all starts with what happened every single morning when a queen woke up. Sugar arrived in Europe during the 1500s, and it was more expensive than gold. Only royalty could afford it, and Queen Elizabeth I was hopelessly addicted. She devoured candied violets for breakfast, nibbled sugared ginger between meals, and ended every evening with marchpane, a thick paste made entirely of sugar. The result was catastrophic. By the time she turned 40, her teeth were brown. At 50, they were black. By 60, most were gone. Ambassadors wrote that when she spoke, her breath was so foul they had to stand several feet away. A German visitor, Paul Hentzner, described it bluntly in 1597. Her Majesty's mouth smelled like a rotting horse. And here's where it gets insane. It became fashionable. Court ladies saw the Queen's black teeth and thought, that's what wealth looks like. They began painting their own teeth black to imitate her. Some used soot, others mixed honey and charcoal, which only sped up their own decay. Imagine the royal ballroom, silk, gold, and jewels glittering under torchlight. Hundreds of nobles laughing, smiling, every mouth revealing rows of black, decayed teeth. The air thick with heavy perfume barely hiding the stench. One Italian ambassador wrote home, "The English court smells like a graveyard covered in roses." But perfume wasn't just for pleasure, it was survival. Because that was far from the only odor that needed masking. Let's talk about something most history books skip, what royal women used during that time of the month. They had no sterile pads, no running water, and no privacy. Their solution? Rags. Old linen strips that were rinsed in cold water and reused month after month. But the truly horrifying part, they often washed these rags in urine. Stale urine, rich in ammonia, was considered the medieval version of detergent. Chamber pots were collected, the contents stored until they fermented, and that yellow liquid was used to cleanse fabrics. Those same rags, soaked in ammonia and dried in dark chambers, were then pressed against the most sensitive part of the body. A German princess's diary from 1456 describes the scene during large court gatherings when multiple ladies were menstruating. She wrote, "The great hall filled with such odor that the Duke ordered all windows open despite the winter frost." Some tried alternatives, stuffing pouches with moss. Sphagnum moss, which we now know has antiseptic qualities, was used simply because it absorbed blood well, but the same moss was reused for months, unwashed, crawling with bacteria. And here's another layer. These women didn't bathe during their periods either. Medieval medicine warned that immersing a menstruating woman in water could kill her by blocking the flow. So for 1 week every month, royal women became even filthier than before. Which brings us to the creatures that lived on their bodies. Every queen, princess, and duchess in medieval Europe had lice. Not maybe had, definitely had. It was so common that delousing became part of the morning routine. Picture this: noble women sitting near their windows while servants comb through their elaborate hair for hours, picking out lice and eggs. They'd drop them onto a special lice cloth, which was then burned in the fireplace. Queen Isabeau of Bavaria had an infestation so severe that her physician eventually ordered her hair cut off completely. He stopped counting after finding over 1,000 lice in just one section. But here's what makes it truly absurd. They believed lice came from dirt itself. They thought being filthy created lice spontaneously. So when holy women like Saint Margaret of Hungary refused to wash and became covered in lice, they saw it as divine proof of their holiness. Margaret once said the lice were sent by God to test me, and she prayed while they crawled across her face. And if you think lice were bad, the fleas were worse. Royal palaces were infested. The rush-covered floors became breeding grounds. One eyewitness at Hampton Court wrote that the floor moved like waves from all the fleas jumping. To fight them, noble women carried small tubes filled with honey or blood, flea traps they wore under their gowns to lure the pests away from their skin. When that didn't work, they kept flea dogs, tiny lap dogs bred specifically to attract fleas so their owners wouldn't have to. But nothing was worse than body lice. These parasites lived in the seams of their clothing, feeding at night. And because queens rarely washed their gowns, which cost more than a commoner's home, the lice lived there permanently. When archaeologists opened the tomb of Queen Isabella of Aragon, they discovered her burial gown still crawling with dormant lice eggs. After 500 years, they were still there, preserved in the fabric. And if you think that's disturbing, wait until you hear what happened when these women got sick. Royal medicine made their suffering even worse. Headache. The cure was to smear fresh bird droppings on your forehead, still warm. The heat, doctors claimed, would draw out the evil humors. Skin rash. You'd bathe the area in virgin boy urine. Royal households literally employed young boys whose only job was to provide fresh urine every morning for medicinal use. And the worst cures were for women's health. Queen Catherine of Aragon desperately wanted a male heir, and her physicians had a treatment. She had to sit over a pot of burning goat feces. The smoke was supposed to wake up the womb. She endured it for hours, the fumes burning her skin. Another fertility remedy involved inserting a pessary made from honey mixed with crocodile dung directly inside the body. It's almost impossible to imagine. Yet this was considered advanced medicine for queens. And we're only just getting started. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we uncover even darker royal secrets that history tried to hide. These weren't desperate peasant remedies. These were treatments prescribed by the finest physicians in Europe for queens and princesses. And when it came time for childbirth, things only got worse. Royal births weren't private moments. They were state events. Every birth meant a potential heir, and that meant witnesses, attendants, and superstition, all combining into what can only be described as a death trap. When a queen went into labor, her birthing chamber was prepared according to long-standing tradition. Windows were sealed, doors locked, and the room was kept as hot as possible, because cold air was believed to endanger the baby. The result? A suffocating, stifling oven. No one washed their hands. Not the midwives, not the physicians, not even the attendants touching the newborn. Queen Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, died 11 days after giving birth. The cause? Almost certainly puerperal fever, a deadly infection caused by unwashed hands introducing bacteria into the birth canal. Her physicians had come straight from examining corpses to deliver the future king. They didn't know it, but they were carrying death under their fingernails. The instruments, when used, were barely wiped with a cloth. The same forceps used on a woman who died of childbed fever might be used on a queen an hour later. Without cleaning, without boiling, without care, and if a queen survived childbirth, only to catch syphilis from her unfaithful husband, the cure was even deadlier. Doctors prescribed mercury, liquid mercury rubbed directly onto open sores. The saying of the time summed it up perfectly: a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. The mercury made their hair fall out, their teeth loosen, their skin peel, and eventually drove them insane. Speaking of hair, let's talk about what was living inside those towering royal hairstyles. By the 1600s, many noblewomen had given up on their natural hair entirely. They shaved their heads and replaced it with elaborate wigs. You'd think this would be more hygienic. You'd be wrong. The wigs were crafted from human hair, often taken from corpses or sold by desperate peasants. They were coated in animal fat and flour paste to hold their shape, which turned them into perfect breeding grounds for filth. Servants routinely found mice nesting in stored wigs. The wigs themselves became ecosystems, crawling with lice, fleas, and sometimes maggots born from the rotting fat. Queen Christina of Sweden's wig was so infested that when she removed it during a council meeting, witnesses saw a stream of lice pour down her neck. She laughed and said, "Even my subjects wish to stay close to their queen." Wigs were almost never cleaned because washing ruined their intricate styling. Instead, they were refreshed with powder, a mixture of flour and white lead. That meant you had rotting fat, human hair from the dead, toxic lead dust, and entire colonies of parasites, all perched proudly on a royal head. One French duchess's wig became so infested that during dinner, maggots fell onto her plate. She calmly brushed them aside and continued eating. These wigs were worn continuously for months. At night, they were placed on wooden stands, where rats would sneak in to feed on the fat and flour. In the morning, the wigs were powdered again and placed back on the head, rats' droppings included. Underneath, the shaved scalps of these women were covered in sores, raw, infected, and bleeding from irritation and infection. But all of it was hidden beneath those beautiful powdered towers of vanity. This combination of obsession and filth extended to every part of their beauty routine. Some practices weren't just disgusting, they were literally fatal. Queen Elizabeth I's makeup ritual eventually killed her. The white paint she used for her face, called ceruse, was made of pure lead. Over years of daily use, it caused abdominal pain, hair loss, memory problems, and finally, death. But even as her face decayed, she kept applying more, layering poison over poison to hide the damage it caused. Diane de Poitiers, mistress of the French king, took it even further. She drank gold chloride solution daily, believing it preserved her youth. When her body was exhumed in 2009, scientists found gold levels 500 times above normal. The gold had literally eaten away her bones from within. Maria Gunning, Countess of Coventry, died at just 27 from cosmetic poisoning. She loved white lead makeup so much that she continued using it even as her face began to rot. Witnesses later said pieces of her skin would fall off when she smiled. To achieve the fashionable high forehead look, royal women removed their hair using mixtures of cat feces and vinegar. When that wasn't strong enough, they used quicklime, the same corrosive substance used to dissolve corpses. One lady-in-waiting to Queen Anne of Denmark wrote that she once saw the Queen's forehead blister and peel after a quicklime treatment. "The skin came off in sheets," she wrote. For rosy cheeks, they used vermilion, mercury sulfide. For sparkling eyes, they dropped belladonna directly into their pupils, making them appear larger and brighter. The poison caused hallucinations and sometimes permanent blindness. They knew something was wrong. They could feel their faces burning, see their skin peeling away. Yet they kept applying more, desperate to preserve the illusion of beauty. And when they weren't poisoning themselves with makeup, they were slowly killing themselves through their clothing. Royal undergarments were rarely, if ever, washed. Corsets, made from whalebone and linen, couldn't be cleaned without falling apart. So they were worn again and again, year after year. Sweat, body oil, and dead skin soaked into the fabric, turning it from white to yellow to brown to black. An inventory from the wardrobe of Mary, Queen of Scots, listed corsets so foul-smelling they had to be burned because no perfume could mask the odor. The outer gowns were even worse. These enormous dresses, worth more than a house, were never washed. Instead, servants refreshed them by hanging them near fires, burning herbs and incense to hide the smell of rot. Some dresses were worn so long that the fabric literally decomposed. Witnesses wrote of silk gowns splitting apart at court functions because the material had rotted through. But the most chilling fashion hazard of all was poisoned clothing. Royal women sometimes received gifts of luxurious garments from rivals. These dresses were worn without washing. After all, who would wash a brand new gift? But some were soaked in mercury or arsenic. As the wearer's body heat rose, the poison seeped into the skin, killing them slowly over weeks. This became so common that some queens hired dress testers, servants who had to wear new gowns first to ensure they weren't deadly. And where did all these unwashed, perfumed, possibly poisoned nobles go to display their finery? To palaces that were just as filthy as they were. The Palace of Versailles, symbol of Europe's ultimate luxury, was also the center of unimaginable filth. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned, because what happened inside Versailles makes everything before it look clean. During grand balls with thousands of guests and barely enough facilities to serve them, aristocratic ladies would often relieve themselves behind curtains or in the corners of glittering halls. One account even describes finding human waste behind a tapestry, inside the queen's own chambers, left by a duchess who couldn't reach her chamber pot in time. The smell was masked with perfume, incense, and scattered herbs. But beneath the roses and lavender lingered the unmistakable stench of human filth that had nowhere to go. Even chamber pots, some of them solid gold, reserved for queens, weren't emptied immediately. In the freezing winters, when emptying them meant stepping outside, they could sit for days. The ammonia fumes alone were enough to burn the eyes of visitors. One Russian ambassador claimed he could smell the palace from a mile away. Imagine it. Thousands of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and piles of waste, all buried under the choking sweetness of perfume. The floors were covered in rush mats, bundles of reeds changed perhaps once per season, that absorbed everything. Spilled wine, blood, vomit, urine. They became living carpets of decay, breeding grounds for fleas, rats, and insects. And still, queens in their finest silks would glide across these same floors, their jeweled trains dragging through filth. Even the throne rooms weren't spared. Multiple eyewitnesses described nobles defecating behind the throne itself when court sessions dragged on too long. The king and queen would sit through it, pretending not to notice, while courtiers pressed perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces, struggling not to gag. But in the middle of all this rot, there were some who took filth and turned it into faith, who made uncleanliness a form of holiness. Some royal women saw dirt as divine. Queen Isabella of Castile didn't avoid bathing because of laziness. She believed filth brought her closer to God. During the siege of Granada, she vowed not to change her undergarments until the city fell. The siege lasted 8 months. When Granada finally surrendered, her linen shift had turned black. It had to be cut from her body. Parts of it had literally fused with her skin from sweat and grime. Isabella considered this a holy triumph. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, born a princess, went even further. After her husband's death, she rejected all cleanliness as a form of penance. She slept in her own filth, welcomed disease as a divine test, and refused all attempts by servants to clean her. When they tried, she fought them off, shouting that they were trying to steal her path to heaven. Saint Margaret of Hungary saw her lice infestation as a gift from God. She prayed while they crawled across her face, believing each bite was a blessing. When offered medicine, she refused it, saying the lice were her little martyrdoms. These weren't seen as symptoms of madness. They were celebrated as proof of spiritual devotion. Noble women across Europe began imitating them, cultivating filth as an act of piety, and then came those whose obsession with blood, death, and vanity went far beyond faith, into true horror. The most infamous was Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary, the so-called Blood Countess. Legend says she murdered over 600 young women and bathed in their blood to preserve her youth. Think about that for a moment. The practical reality. Human blood coagulates in minutes. It thickens, turns brown, and reeks of iron and decay. Anyone bathing in it would be sitting in a tub of congealed, rotting liquid that clung to the skin in sticky, foul-smelling layers. Court testimony from her trial describes servants scraping dried blood from her body with special tools. The stench in her bathing chambers was so overwhelming that attendants would vomit while tending her. The baths attracted flies and vermin. Within hours, the blood would rot in the heat. And yet, Bathory reportedly continued this ritual for years, sitting in tubs of decomposing blood, convinced it was keeping her beautiful. Whether every gruesome detail was true or exaggerated doesn't matter. The fact that people believed it was possible tells you everything about hygiene in that era. The idea of a noble woman bathing in blood wasn't seen as impossible, only extreme. After all, if queens were already bathing in milk, they'd later feed to the poor, painting their faces with lead until their skin peeled off, and sitting over pots of burning feces for fertility. Was bathing in blood really that shocking? Now, let me paint one last image for you. A day in the life of a typical medieval queen. She wakes up in sheets that haven't been changed for months, crawling with bedbugs and fleas. Her body hasn't touched water in weeks, maybe months. She relieves herself in a golden pot that won't be emptied for days. Her ladies-in-waiting arrive to dress her. First, the shift she's worn for 2 weeks, stiff with sweat and stained with menstrual blood, washed only in urine. Then the corset, black with years of grime, that's never been cleaned. Then layers of gowns alive with lice and fleas. Her face is coated with white lead. A new layer added every morning to cover the sores from yesterday's. Her teeth are black, her breath rancid. Her towering wig, styled with rancid animal fat, teeming with insects, is placed over her shaved, scab-covered scalp. She spends her day in glittering rooms where nobles defecate behind curtains, where the floors are alive with fleas, where the air is thick with rotting perfume and unwashed bodies. When she falls ill, her cures are bird droppings, feces poultices, and mercury rubs. When she gives birth, unwashed hands reach inside her. When the sores from her lead makeup open and fester, she hides them with more makeup. This was the daily life of the richest, most powerful women in Europe. Women with access to water, soap, servants, and luxury. They could have been clean, but they chose not to be. They chose superstition over science, vanity over sanity, appearance over survival. They literally preferred death to cleanliness. Queen Elizabeth I died with her face destroyed by lead. Queen Jane Seymour died from an infection no one bothered to prevent. Countless others died young, from mercury, arsenic, childbirth, or disease, their bodies collapsing under the weight of their own ignorance. The so-called golden age of royalty was really an age of gold-covered rot. Jewels hiding infection, silks concealing decay, crowns sitting atop lice-infested heads. So the next time you look at a portrait of a medieval queen, radiant, flawless, serene, remember what the paint doesn't show. Remember what was crawling beneath those gowns, festering beneath those jewels, and decaying behind that powdered face. The past wasn't elegant, it was revolting, and these queens, these icons of beauty and power, were among the filthiest people who ever lived. Not because they had to be, but because they chose to be. And somewhere, in another palace, another noblewoman is painting her teeth black to look like a queen, never realizing that mimicking decay has become the ultimate mark of high fashion. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us because next we're revealing the story of the Spanish king whose body was so deformed that his teenage bride fainted in terror on their wedding night.